I had never imagined I'd start my day pulling a bear cub from barbed wire. It was supposed to be a simple hike in the woods behind my house, clearing my head after another tough week at work. The morning air was crisp, pine needles crunching beneath my boots, and the only sound was the distant rush of the river. That tranquility shattered when I heard a desperate cry, piercing and frightened. My heart leaped. Rushing through thick brush and stumbling over exposed roots, I burst into a small clearing. There, tangled brutally in a rusty coil of barbed wire, was a tiny bear cub, fur stained with blood, eyes wide with terror. "Easy there, little guy," I whispered, my voice shaking more than I'd have liked. I approached cautiously, trying to calm the cub, whose frantic struggles only tightened the barbs deeper into his fur. Carefully, I knelt, pulling my multi-tool from my pocket. "It's okay," I whispered, voice trembling, trying to steady myself as much as the frightened animal. "Just hold on." Every cut I made into the twisted wire sent shudders through the bear cub, each shudder jolting my nerves tighter. Finally, after agonizing minutes, the last coil snapped free, and the bear stumbled awkwardly away, breathing heavily but free. Relief washed over me, but lasted less than a heartbeat. The snap of branches behind me froze my breath. Slowly turning, I found myself staring straight into the deep, dark eyes of a massive mother bear, her heavy breathing visible in the morning chill. Terror gripped me. My limbs felt numb. But what happened next defied everything I'd expected. Instead of charging, she paused, eyes shifting between me and her cub. After a moment, with startling gentleness, she nudged her baby, pushing it towards safety. Then, she turned back to me. Our eyes met again, hers filled with something I could swear was gratitude, or perhaps understanding, before she turned, gently nudging her cub ahead into the safety of the trees. Left standing in stunned silence, my pulse echoing loudly in my ears, I realized the world wasn't exactly what I'd always believed. The drive home felt unusually long. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white, mind still trapped back in the woods. Images kept flashing through my mind, the terrified eyes of the cub, the rusted wire cutting into its small body, and the strangely calm gaze of the mother bear. When I finally parked in our driveway, the familiar sight of our cozy house didn't bring the relief I'd hoped for. Instead, it felt oddly disconnected from reality, almost surreal. Stepping inside, I found Emma reading on the couch. Her warm smile faded when she saw my expression. "Hey, Jason, are you all right?" she asked, her voice gentle but tinged with worry. I hesitated, unsure how to put my morning into words. "Not really," I finally muttered, collapsing onto the chair across from her. Emma set her book aside, sitting up straighter. "Tell me what happened." I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "I found a bear cub stuck in barbed wire today. It was brutal, Em. He was so small, so helpless. Someone just left a trap out there. Didn't care about what it could do. Who does something like that?" Emma sighed, softly shaking her head. "That's awful. But Jason, it's the woods, you know? Things happen out there all the time." Her words caught me off guard, irritation sparking unexpectedly. "It doesn't make it okay. Animals suffer because of careless idiots who can't think beyond themselves." "I get it," Emma responded, her tone becoming defensive. "But you can't let it eat you up like this. This nature, harsh and wild. We can't fix everything." I stared at her, disbelief and frustration rising in my chest. "Can't we at least try?" I snapped, louder than intended. "Just because it's nature doesn't mean we have the right to make it worse." Emma flinched slightly, visibly hurt. "Jason, calm down. You're overreacting. It was one incident and you did what you could. Let it go." I stood abruptly, pacing the room, feeling trapped. "I can't just forget this, Em. The look in that bear's eyes. It was so human, so real. I can't shake it." Emma sighed again, softer now, trying to bridge the sudden gap between us. "I know you're upset, but maybe you need some rest. Let's not fight about this." I stopped pacing, my gaze dropping to the floor, guilt mixed with my anger, softening the harsh edges. "Maybe you're right," I muttered quietly. but it feels wrong to just move on. Look, Emma gently took my hand, pulling me to sit next to her. Her touch was comforting, but the disconnect lingered. You have such a big heart, Jason, but don't let every injustice break it. We can't carry the weight of the world. I nodded slowly, but deep inside I knew this wasn't over. Not for me. Something about today had changed me irreversibly, and pretending otherwise felt impossible. Emma leaned against my shoulder, her warmth soothing yet somehow distant, as my mind wandered back into the forest, trapped again between the agony of the cub and the mysterious gaze of the mother bear. Sleep had become my enemy. Each night was filled with vivid nightmares that played out relentlessly, dragging me back into that damned clearing. I'd wake covered in sweat, gasping for breath, heart racing from images of the cub tangled again in barbed wire, its cries echoing painfully through my mind. Worse yet was the recurring presence of the mother bear, her dark eyes pleading and judgmental, always leaving me with a crushing sense of guilt. Days blended into restless nights, my mood darkening with exhaustion. Even Emma's attempts at reassurance couldn't pull me from the shadow consuming my thoughts. Jason, you look awful, Emma said quietly over breakfast, her eyes searching my face. You can't keep doing this to yourself. Doing what exactly? Caring? My reply came out harsher than I intended. She flinched, but I couldn't soften it. Frustration had taken hold of me completely. Jason, I'm trying to help, she whispered softly, eyes filling with tears. But you're pushing everyone away. Even your mom called. She's worried. I sighed heavily, dropping my gaze. I knew she was right, but admitting it felt impossible. I need closure, Em. I have to go back to the forest. I need to make sure that Bear's alive. Emma shook her head, her frustration bubbling to the surface. Jason, this obsession is consuming you. You're not thinking clearly. It's dangerous and it's pointless. What good will it do? Maybe none, I snapped back. But at least I'll know. She stared at me in silence, her gaze filled with a hurt and disappointment that burned deeper than any argument could. Later that day, ignoring Emma's concerns and my family's worried calls, I packed a small bag and returned to the woods. My heart raced as I stepped back into the trees, memories flooding me with every step. It felt like returning to the scene of a crime, each footfall heavy with dread and anticipation. As the clearing came into view, anxiety tightened in my chest. I half expected to find the bear cub caught again, suffering because I had been careless or slow. But the clearing was empty, quiet, almost peaceful. The barbed wire lay on the ground, twisted and discarded, a stark reminder of the horror I'd witnessed. Kneeling, I picked up a fragment of rusted wire, twisting it in my fingers as if it could tell me something. The silence pressed in, heavy and accusing. Had I done enough? Suddenly, a rustle sounded from behind me. My heart skipped a beat. Slowly, nervously, I turned, half expecting the mother bear to emerge again. But there was nothing, just an empty forest, the leaves whispering softly in the breeze. I stood, breathing deeply, trying to steady my pounding heart. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe I was chasing ghosts, but something inside refused to let it go. This wasn't just about one bear cub anymore. It was about something larger, something I couldn't yet grasp fully. As I walked slowly back towards my car, the unease didn't fade. Instead, it sank deeper into my bones, a chilling certainty that my journey had only just begun. The next day, restless and still haunted, I found myself back in the forest again. It was almost automatic now, driven more by instinct than conscious choice. Each step deeper into the trees seemed to pull me closer to whatever it was I desperately sought. Answers, justice, maybe just peace of mind. As I approached the clearing once more, a new sound broke through the stillness. The rhythmic crunch of footsteps and the low murmur of someone speaking quietly. Tensing, I paused, my breath shallow, my body alert for danger. Emerging cautiously from the undergrowth, I spotted a tall, weathered man inspecting the spot where the cub had been trapped. He wore an old, well-worn ranger jacket, his grizzled beard flecked with gray, eyes narrowed in concentration. "Hey there," I called out, cautiously stepping into the open. The man spun around quickly, visibly startled before relaxing into a wary stance. "You shouldn't sneak up on people out here," he said evenly, voice firm yet calm. "Name's Tom, park ranger around these parts. You got a reason to be here." "Jason," I introduced myself, trying to sound confident despite my nerves. "I was here a few days ago. Found a bear cub stuck in barbed wire. I'm trying to figure out who could have done it." Tom's eyes sharpened with interest. "You found the cub?" "I heard about it. Figured it was just another careless trap left by some local idiots." "Idiots or criminals?" I asked, frustration simmering beneath my words. Tom nodded slowly, studying me carefully. "Little bit of both, honestly. We've had a serious issue lately, illegal trapping, poaching. People come out here thinking they're beyond the law, setting traps for wildlife, selling pelts and parts online. Makes me sick." I felt my blood boil at his words. "Is anyone doing anything about it?" He shrugged, frustration clear in his rough features. "We try, but resources are limited, manpower even more so. Poachers keep moving locations, staying just out of reach. It's a constant battle, one we're losing." Anger and determination surged within me, mixing dangerously. "Maybe there's something we can do together," I proposed cautiously. "I have to help. That cub. I can't shake the feeling that this isn't an isolated incident." Tom raised an eyebrow, measuring me silently. Finally, he sighed, nodding in reluctant agreement. "If you're serious, maybe I could use some help. But you gotta understand, this isn't a game. These people are dangerous. They don't mess around." "I'm not backing down," I responded, my voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at my stomach. "I can't let this go. I won't." Tom seemed to recognize something familiar in my eyes, a reflection of his own frustration. He extended a rough hand, shaking mine firmly. "All right, Jason, let's see what we can find. But remember, we're stepping into dangerous territory here. Once you start down this road, there's no easy way back." "I'm ready," I said, hoping my words were true. Together we started to search the area, examining the ground carefully for any clues. Discarded equipment, footprints, anything that might lead us to whoever set the cruel trap. Each clue uncovered deepened my resolve, fueling my determination to stop the cruelty inflicted on these innocent animals. Yet, even as we moved forward together, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling. Had I just stepped into something far bigger and far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined? Tom and I spent days quietly tracking through the forest, piecing together evidence and carefully noting suspicious movements. My initial excitement quickly turned to tension as I understood the seriousness of what we were facing. The beauty of the forest now carried a sinister undertone, every rustle of leaves making my pulse spike. One late afternoon, as shadows stretched long across the forest floor, Tom suddenly froze, raising a hand to silence me. "Hear that?" he whispered, his eyes narrowing. I strained to listen, heart hammering in my chest. Distant voices drifted toward us, rough and harsh. Quietly, we crept closer, hiding behind a thicket of dense bushes. In a clearing ahead, we saw three men talking loudly, rifles slung over their shoulders, piles of animal pelts scattered around their feet. "That's them," Tom muttered grimly, his jaw tight with anger. "We should call for backup," I whispered urgently. "No reception out here," Tom replied softly. "We'll have to handle this ourselves or lose them." Before I could argue, one of the poachers suddenly glanced up, staring directly at our hiding spot. "Hey, who's there?" he shouted, his voice harsh and alarmed. "Move!" Tom yelled, grabbing my arm as gunfire erupted around us, bullets splintering bark and kicking up dirt. We sprinted blindly through the trees, branches whipping painfully across our faces, breathing ragged with fear and exertion. I could hear the poachers crashing through the underbrush behind us, their angry shouts echoing terrifyingly close. Tom led the way, agile despite his age, ducking under low branches and jumping over fallen logs. Suddenly, a sharp cry of pain tore through the chaos. Turning sharply, I saw Tom stumble, his leg caught in a hidden trap. "Tom!" I shouted, skidding to a stop and rushing back. "Go, Jason! Get out of here!" Tom yelled, struggling desperately with the cruel jaws of metal. "I'm not leaving you!" I snapped fiercely, adrenaline surging as I worked frantically to free his trapped leg. Blood seeped darkly through his torn pants, his face pale from pain. Gunshots echoed again, closer this time. Fear clawed at my chest as the voices of the poachers drew nearer, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. Finally, with a last burst of strength, I managed to pry open the trap. Helping Tom to his feet, we stumbled forward, each step a struggle against pain and panic. "We're not going to make it," Tom gasped, leaning heavily on me, blood leaving a dark trail behind us. "We have to," I replied through clenched teeth, refusing to give in. We reached a steep slope, slick with moss and leaves. Without hesitation, we slid down, crashing roughly through undergrowth, landing painfully at the bottom. Breathless and exhausted, we scrambled into a hidden hollow beneath tangled roots, huddled in tense silence. Above us, footsteps stopped near the slope's edge. We held our breath, hearts hammering, barely daring to move. "They can't be far," one voice growled angrily. Time slowed to a crawl as we lay hidden, dread tightening around my chest. Tom met my gaze, his eyes wide with shared fear. Our survival hinged on silence and sheer luck as danger loomed just above our heads. Night had already fallen when Tom and I finally managed to stumble out of the woods, battered and exhausted. Tom's leg was badly injured, blood soaking through makeshift bandages I'd hastily crafted. The entire walk back was silent, filled with an unspoken understanding that we had narrowly escaped something terrifying. As I drove Tom to the hospital, his pale face illuminated by passing streetlights, my mind raced. We had identified at least one of the poachers, a face that kept replaying in my mind, nagging at my memory. I'd seen that man before, but where? The next morning, after barely sleeping, I arrived at the office in a daze. Co-workers moved around me, oblivious to the turmoil in my mind. Then, as I stood pouring a stale cup of coffee in the break room, everything snapped into sharp focus. Across the room stood Mike Harris, friendly, reliable Mike, who'd once helped me move into my apartment and often chatted with me about weekend hikes. He glanced up, nodding casually in greeting, his eyes calm, untroubled. Those eyes, I suddenly realized, were exactly the same as the ones I'd seen in the forest, narrowed in anger, a rifle slung carelessly over his shoulder. "Jason, you all right?" Mike asked, sensing something off in my rigid stance. My hands shook slightly as I placed the coffee cup down, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Funny question, Mike, considering last night." His expression shifted subtly, suspicion flickering briefly before he forced an innocent confusion. "Last night? What are you talking about?" "I saw you," I said quietly, voice sharp with anger. "In the woods. You and your friends shooting at us like we were nothing, trapping animals for profit." His eyes hardened instantly, the friendly mask vanishing. "Careful, Jason," he warned, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You don't know what you're talking about. Keep quiet, and we both get to keep our jobs and lives intact. Understand?" Anger flared through me, pushing fear aside. "You nearly killed us. Do you really think I can just pretend that didn't happen?" Mike leaned closer, his tone turning menacing. "Think carefully, Jason. People disappear every day. You don't want to cross paths with the wrong people." He turned sharply, leaving me trembling with rage and disbelief. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd imagined possible. Mike had been someone I'd trusted, considered a friend. How had I never seen who he truly was? That night, torn between fear for my safety and an intense sense of duty, I stared at my phone, debating whether to call the authorities. Tom had trusted me. Those animals deserved justice. Yet Mike's threat lingered heavily, echoing darkly in my mind. My finger hovered uncertainly over the screen, knowing this decision could cost me dearly. But the memory of the cub's pleading eyes, combined with Tom's wounded trust, finally pushed me over the edge. Taking a deep breath, I dialed the number, heart pounding, praying I was making the right choice. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room burned against my closed eyelids as consciousness slowly returned. Pain surged through my body, sharpest in my left side where I'd hit the ground hard after the fall. Every breath felt like a struggle, but nothing hurt as deeply as the knowledge of what brought me here. Jason. Emma's voice broke softly through the haze, filled with a mix of relief and worry. My eyes fluttered open, finding her seated beside the bed, her hands tightly gripping mine. "Hey!" I croaked, my throat dry and painful. "You didn't have to come." Emma shook her head slightly, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Of course I did. God, Jason, when I got the call, I've never been so scared." I winced, shifting uncomfortably, the movement sending fresh waves of pain through my torso. Emma gently placed a hand on my chest, urging me to stay still. "Don't move too much," she whispered gently. "You fractured a rib and bruised your lungs pretty badly. You're lucky to be alive." "Doesn't feel very lucky," I muttered bitterly, my mind replaying the confrontation with Mike, the moment of betrayal still fresh, raw, and painful. "Jason, I'm sorry," Emma suddenly said, her voice trembling. "I didn't take you seriously when you first told me about this. I thought you were overreacting, but I was wrong." I turned my head slightly, meeting her gaze, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "You couldn't have known," I said weakly. "I barely knew what I was getting myself into." "But you did it anyway," Emma interrupted softly, her eyes fixed firmly on mine. "You knew the risks and you still went forward. That kind of courage, I didn't appreciate it until now." I sighed, exhaustion seeping deeper into my bones. "Emma, it wasn't bravery. It was just necessary. If someone doesn't stand up, if we don't do something, what happens next? Who else gets hurt?" Emma squeezed my hand tighter, her voice dropping to an earnest whisper. "But at what cost, Jason? Your life, our relationship, your family? You can't save the world by yourself." Her words hit hard, forcing me to confront what I'd been avoiding. "I know," I admitted quietly, "but I also can't pretend none of this matters. If I do nothing, then I'm part of the problem." "So where's the balance?" she asked desperately, tears finally escaping down her cheeks. "How do you choose between what's right and what's safe?" I shook my head slightly, a lump forming painfully in my throat. "Maybe you don't. Maybe doing the right thing always costs something. But the alternative, standing by, doing nothing, would cost even more." Emma leaned forward, pressing her forehead against my hand, shoulders shaking quietly as she cried. "I'm scared for you, Jason," she whispered brokenly. "But I'm also proud." A wave of emotion surged through me, blending gratitude and sorrow. In that moment, despite the pain and uncertainty, I felt strangely validated. We'd both crossed a line we couldn't retreat from, our lives permanently changed by the choices made. As Emma's gentle sobs filled the quiet hospital room, I closed my eyes again, knowing my fight was far from over, but also knowing, finally, that I wasn't facing it alone. Recovery was slow, filled with tedious hospital routines and endless moments of reflection. Each day blurred into the next, filled with the hum of machines, sterile smells, and quiet conversations with Emma. Yet, amidst the monotony, a new clarity began to form within me. One afternoon, as I was propped up against the pillows, scrolling aimlessly through news on my phone, a headline caught my attention. "Local poaching ring arrested after tip-off." My heart skipped a beat, fingers trembling slightly as I clicked on the article. There they were, faces I'd seen in the forest, and among them was Mike. His expression hardened into a defiant scowl. The article detailed how an anonymous call had sparked an investigation, leading to their arrest. My chest tightened, a strange mix of relief and sadness flooding through me. Just then, Tom entered the room, leaning heavily on a cane but smiling warmly. "Heard the good news?" he asked, nodding toward my phone. "Yeah," I said softly, still processing. "I can't believe it's actually over." "Well, over is a strong word," Tom corrected, settling heavily into a chair beside my bed. They caught a few guys, but this problem goes way deeper. We both know it. I sighed, nodding slowly. I was just starting to feel relieved. You know? Like maybe everything wasn't completely broken. Tom chuckled lightly, a bit bitterly. Nothing gets fixed overnight, Jason. But what you did mattered. It set something in motion. His words resonated deeply. You think we made a real difference? I asked, my voice cautious. Without question, Tom replied firmly, eyes serious. You chose action over apathy. That's rare, and it's powerful. But this is just the start. Emma, who had quietly entered the room, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Her presence was calming, anchoring me in reality. What does that mean for Jason now, Tom? She asked softly. Tom's eyes met mine, assessing my determination. That's entirely up to him. Silence filled the room briefly, heavy with expectation. Finally, I spoke, my voice steadier than it had felt in days. I can't go back to how things were. What happened, it showed me something important. We can't just wait around, hoping things improve. Emma squeezed my shoulder gently, a quiet sign of support. Tom nodded slowly, approval clear in his weary gaze. It's a tough road, Jason. Lots of battles ahead. I know, I answered without hesitation. But I also know it's where I belong now. Protecting these animals, this land. It feels right, like I finally understand what I'm supposed to do. Tom smiled slightly, a faint spark returning to his eyes. Welcome to the fight, then. It's messy and exhausting. But there's no better feeling than knowing you're part of something bigger. As they left, Emma leaned in, kissing my forehead softly. I'm proud of you, she whispered. And I'll be here no matter what. Alone again, I stared out the window at the distant trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. For the first time in weeks, a sense of peace settled over me. The fight wasn't over, but at least now I knew exactly where I stood. The air was crisp and charged with a strange energy as Tom and I stepped back into the forest. It had been weeks since the incident, but walking the familiar trail still sent chills down my spine. Each tree seemed to carry a memory, and the distant rustling leaves whispered reminders of what had brought us here. We moved silently, methodically dismantling hidden traps and snares left behind by the poachers. Tom worked carefully, his movements slowed by his still healing leg. Despite the pain etched across his face, determination burned fiercely in his eyes. Almost done, he grunted, pulling another rusty snare from the underbrush. Feels good, doesn't it? Yeah, I replied, though an unease lingered in my gut. Each dismantled trap was a small victory, but it didn't erase the scars, physical or emotional, that the forest and its inhabitants had suffered. Suddenly, Tom stopped, his posture rigid. Jason, he whispered sharply, nodding toward a thick cluster of trees. Over there. Turning slowly, my heart jumped into my throat. Emerging from the shadows was the bear I'd hoped, and feared, to see again. The large female stood silently, watching us carefully, her massive form imposing yet oddly calm. My breathing slowed, my body frozen as our eyes met again. Memories flooded my mind. The terrified cub, her surprising gentleness, the bond formed in that moment of vulnerability and understanding. But I wasn't foolish. She was still a wild animal, powerful and unpredictable. Stay still, Tom whispered urgently. Don't make any sudden moves. The bear stepped closer, carefully, deliberately. My pulse quickened, every instinct screaming to flee, but something deeper held me steady. Her gaze locked onto mine, and for an endless moment, the world seemed to stop. Then, unexpectedly, she stopped a mere few feet away, settling onto her haunches, her posture relaxed. Her eyes softened, her expression oddly gentle. It was as if she recognized me, remembered the kindness I'd shown her cub. Incredible, Tom murmured, awe evident in his voice. She knows you. I didn't think this was possible. I breathed, barely audible emotion catching in my throat. Slowly, carefully, the bear turned her head, giving a soft grunt. Behind her, shy and cautious, the cub appeared, grown slightly, its fur healed, though marked by faint scars. It approached cautiously, curiosity evident in its bright, intelligent eyes. My heart swelled painfully with emotion. The little creature I'd saved, now stronger, healthy, standing before me. I understood, finally, why everything I'd endured had been worth it. After a long, poignant moment, the mother nudged her cub gently, guiding it back into the safety of the trees. With one final glance, she paused, meeting my eyes with a look of quiet gratitude and respect before disappearing into the forest. Tom exhaled slowly, releasing the tension held within him. "You okay, Jason?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "Better than okay. It feels like closure." He smiled faintly, gripping my shoulder. "Yeah, but remember, this isn't an end. It's a beginning." I knew he was right. Watching the bears disappear, I realized my life had irrevocably changed, setting me on a path filled with purpose and relentless dedication. I turned back to Tom, determination renewed. "Let's finish this," I said firmly, stepping forward once again, knowing fully that my journey was far from over. Stepping onto my porch felt different this time. The familiar creak of the wooden steps, the gentle sway of the porch swing, it all felt strangely comforting yet undeniably foreign. The events of the past few weeks had reshaped everything I thought I knew about myself, about people, and about the delicate balance of life. Emma waited for me at the door, eyes warm but uncertain, mirroring my own complicated feelings. Without a word, she embraced me tightly, her warmth grounding me momentarily, reminding me why this fight mattered. Inside, our home felt oddly quiet, peaceful, as if holding its breath in expectation of my next move. Sitting on the couch, Emma finally broke the silence. "Jason, I've thought a lot while you were gone," she began gently, choosing her words with care. "What you've done, it's opened my eyes too. Maybe I've been too complacent, too willing to turn away from uncomfortable truths." I nodded slowly, feeling relief flood through me. "This was never just my fight, Em. It affects all of us. We can't ignore it anymore." She moved closer, her hand finding mine, holding tightly. "But can we really change things? Can people truly change?" Her question hung heavily in the air, echoing my own persistent doubts. Could one person really make a difference? Could my small acts ripple outward, inspiring others to rethink their choices, their responsibilities? "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "Maybe changing human nature is impossible. But does that mean we shouldn't try? I've seen the cruelty we're capable of, but I've also seen compassion, courage, sacrifice. Maybe it's enough if we change ourselves first." Emma squeezed my hand tighter, nodding thoughtfully. "Maybe it starts with just one person refusing to look away, like you did." Her words settled deeply within me, anchoring the resolve I'd found in the forest. Exactly. And if my actions can inspire even one person, then it matters. It's worth it. We stood quietly, each absorbed in thought, the silence filled with the weight of possibility. Finally, Emma broke the silence, her voice firm, resolute. "Then let's do this together. Let's be part of something bigger." I looked into her eyes, recognizing the newfound determination there. For the first time in weeks, a genuine smile crossed my face. "Together?" I repeated, feeling a fresh sense of hope ignite within me. Later that night, sitting quietly by the window and gazing into the darkness, I thought back to the bear cub and his mother. Their eyes, full of pain and gratitude, haunted yet inspired me. They were the catalysts, the ones who showed me that every action, every choice held power to harm or to heal. As the moon rose high above the trees, casting silver shadows across the yard, one question lingered heavily, unanswered, lingering in the quiet stillness. Can one person's actions truly change the world? Maybe the real power lay in the attempt itself, in refusing to surrender to apathy. Perhaps that was enough, or maybe it was just the beginning. With this newfound purpose clear in my heart, I knew my journey had just begun. and the answers were still out there, waiting to be discovered.